Welcome back to the channel. There's a new paper out now in JAMA Internal Medicine, and it actually makes the claim that butter is worse for you than seed oils. That's right, it comes head on in the MAHA coalition and tries to fight back on a MAHA talking point. But what is this paper? Why was it published in JAMA IM? Is it credible science? Let me break it down for you. All right, I had a chance to read Butter and Plant-Based Oil Intake and Mortality, which is making the rounds because it was published in a pretty good medical journal, JAMA Internal Medicine. The editors there, no secret, they don't like the MAHA movement and they want to #resist. So they decided to publish this paper that claims to look at observational data and draw the conclusion that butter is worse for you than plant-based seed oils. But the paper suffers from three limitations. Let me run through three limitations. Number one, they actually have no clue how much butter anyone ate. You see, they gave people a food frequency questionnaire. It just said that I eat butter 3 times a week, 2 times a week, 1 time a week. It doesn't say how much butter they ate. It doesn't say if they had a butter croissant, put a smear of butter on a piece of toast, or had a heavy gumbo-rich food with a lot of butter in their cooking. It doesn't tell you how much butter. So they need to get to how many grams of butter you eat. And what they do is they correlate a food frequency questionnaire with a 7-day dietary log. And they look to see at the correlation between how much people eat in this dietary log, where we gave people a scale, told them to write all that down, and food frequency questionnaires. And they find that each individual food product has a different correlation coefficient, different R-squared value. And actually, I pulled the reference and I found that in all these correlations in this huge validation study, butter was one of the worst ones. In other words, that the how often you eat question doesn't really tell you how much butter someone eats. It's actually one of the worst correlations. So that's problem number one. They've got no clue how much butter you're eating. Problem number two, they are lumping together the seed oils, which everyone knows that RFK Jr. and the MAHA movement don't like, with extra virgin olive oil. In fact, they lump them all together. They put corn, safflower, soybean, canola, and olive oil in a single bucket. But here's the problem. Nobody is going to say that olive oil is bad for you. Everybody loves extra virgin olive oil. That's one thing that all sides agree on. They're lumping all these oils together. That to me makes no sense, okay? That to me is sort of stacking the deck in favor of this conclusion. Why? Because rich people love extra virgin olive oil. I do too. I have a certain extra virgin olive oil I like to cook with. I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. Problem number three, the people who eat butter in this time period over the last few decades, when we had a concerted effort to demonize saturated fats, they're fundamentally different than the people who eat these other oils. They're more likely to be smokers. They have different exercise practice patterns. They're eating different foods. They're different socioeconomic status. They're just different people, and you can see all that in table 1 of the manuscript. So what am I to think when this paper that suffers from three biases: one, they don't know how much of these oils and butter people eat. Number two, they're lumping these oils together in a weird way. Number three, it's completely imbalanced for all covariates when you look at the raw data, and they proceed nonetheless. What am I to think? And why is it published in JAMA IM? The truth is, it's a low-tier, low-credibility piece of trash observational nutritional epidemiology study that belongs in the trash basket. You can infer nothing from this garbage study. Yet, it's published in one of the most prestigious journals where the editors are known for being #resistors to Donald Trump and MAHA. What am I to think? What I think is, it's a great example of the blind spot in academia. When academia is so against MAHA and RFK Jr., they have a blind spot. They will publish any crap article that supports their view, that quote-unquote fights back. But to me, it's a huge mistake. If you want to engage in the realm of science discussion, the only way to do so is with the absolute most credible evidence. You will not win this war. It will be a Pyrrhic victory if you try to push back on the MAHA movement with low credibility studies. You're going to further alienate Americans. You're going to further polarize people. You're going to get people on the other side to hate you even more, and they will not take seriously anything in the pages of JAMA IM. So to me, publishing this represents everything wrong in the academy. All the brains are broken. They can't take what RFK Jr. is doing, what Trump is doing, and they're going to try to push back in any way possible. They did that in the worst possible way. They published perhaps one of the worst nutritional epidemiology studies I've ever seen in a prestigious medical journal. It's clearly propaganda. It's clearly timed to be a thumb in the eye of RFK Jr. And here's the kicker. The funding and support says, quote, this study was supported by research grants from the NIH. There's a UM, there's a PO1, there's an RO1, there's a UO1. There's lots and lots of grants. Here's another problem you find yourself in. Why is the federal government funding research that is weaponized against one political party. Let's agree, this paper has nothing to do with science. I mean, I look at this paper, I don't see any science in it. I see a manipulated analytic plan to suit an agenda. That's what it is. We'll be honest. It's not really science. And that is funded by NIH tax dollars. That's a big mistake because the Trump administration is coming at NIH hard, and they're going to cut this funding hard, and you're just giving them more opportunity by publishing this. There's a number of authors here, Frank Hu, Walter Willett, Mir Stamfer. These are authors from Harvard who have done some of the lowest credibility science I've seen in the last 50 years, just repeatedly observational data dredging. I think it's a problem when you have these authors with so much grant funding to do low-level nutritional epidemiology, always capturing the clickbait headlines, but not really giving us an informative view of biomedicine. So those are my thoughts on this paper. It is really bad. And now I'm going to continue this video for the YouTube listeners, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this and some other related things. I'm going to give you my tips for how I like to eat. All right. My tips. Here are my tips for how I like to eat. And these are in part evidence-based, but they're also an amalgam of all sorts of things. I put this on Dr. Vinay Prasad. It's on my Substack, my observations and thoughts, www.drvinayprasad.com. Okay. Point number one, we're talking about butter and seed oils. One, I eat pastries extremely rarely. I almost never do. But when I do, I want them to be made properly in the French baking technique with proper lamination and really nice layering when you see that. I want to see a really good croissant, for instance. Second point, I never eat fried foods. I avoid fried foods. I think they are unhealthy. I would never eat them. But when I do, I would prefer my French fries be cooked in tallow because that leads to a crunchier outside, more golden brown, delicious GBD, and the inside is much more fluffy. And in fact, recently I ate at a really lovely French restaurant here in San Francisco, and I had a perfect pommes frites. So I want it to be good. You know, if you're going to eat it, it's got to be good. But of course, I don't eat it. I would never cook it in my house. I don't eat fast food. I like to exercise and stay healthy. I don't eat fast food. I occasionally err like everyone does, but when I do, but I think it's bad for you. So that's the point right there. Okay. When I do, I try to minimize the damage like anyone else. But next point, I cook with extra virgin olive oil and ghee. Hello, I'm Indian, and sometimes a pat of butter in the pan or a lot of butter in the pan. But I assure you I don't measure it, and I think that's probably the best way to cook. I actually don't use any of those, what I consider to be terrible oils with low flash point that burn and that don't provide a good cooking environment, like canola oil and safflower seed oil. I don't use those shit oils. I cook with cast iron. Oh, here's another thing we don't talk enough about. What do you cook with? I don't cook with Teflon-coated things. I have a very well-seasoned cast iron skillet. I have multiple cast iron skillets. I cook in cast iron. I cook in Le Creuset, proper enamel ware. I cook in a pressure cooker because I'm Indian. Of course, we make a lot of lentils. I cook in a rice cooker. Obviously, Zojirushi. The only, if you're going to cook in a rice cooker, you got to use the good rice cooker. I don't use a lot of aluminum pans. I don't use anything with nonstick. I don't use plastic utensils. I use wooden utensils or metal utensils. I don't store cooked food in plastics. I store cooked food that's going to be eaten later in glass with perhaps a plastic lid, but that one that's not coming into contact with the food. I almost never use the microwave. I use a gas range, and I think electric ranges are the ones that should be banned not because of the environment. That's not the issue. The issue is that they make terrible food. You have to be a really gifted chef to cook well on an electric stove. I do give people credit who can cook really well on an electric stove. I don't like using an electric stove. I like a gas stove because it's the only way to cook food properly. And anyone who wants to ban gas stoves can go to hell. And then the observational literature on asthma and gas stoves is almost as shitty as that butter literature. So I don't take that with one grain of salt. I was lucky enough that even though I grew up in the 1980s and everyone was hysterical about butter and made people eat margarine, I had a mother who believed that you have to eat butter. And so she never switched because she cooked the way her grandmother cooked, and that's how she passed along cooking to me. I believe in small portions. I believe in not overeating. I believe in traditional and proper cooking techniques. And I personally it's going to find it hard to believe, but I spend about 10 hours a week cooking in my own kitchen. And then finally, where does all this cooking and food interest come from? When I was 12, as a form of punishment, my mother would make me work in her kitchen. And I didn't appreciate that at the time, but I do 20 years later. So thanks, Mom. That's the second part of the video. Those are my practice patterns. Some are evidence-based, some aren't evidence-based, but that's life. What kind of shirt do you like to wear? What kind of jacket do you wear? What kind of shoes do you wear? These are not randomized control trial kind of questions. How you cook is not always a randomized control trial question. My objection is when science inserts itself claims that safflower seed oil is better than butter, but that claim is literally pulling that out of your ass. It's the lowest credibility claim I've ever seen. So my problem is when science is bastardized, when it's used for political gain, when it's done poorly, which is what I see a lot in nutritional epidemiology. I don't try to do nutritional epidemiology. I know that these questions will not be answered in the absence of large, prospective, or randomized studies, which there's no appetite for, no pun intended, and that aren't going to happen, and aren't necessary, because I also need a randomized study to know that I particularly like this shirt and I like, denim shirts. Okay, the third part of the video. Easy come, easy go. DEI buzzwords helped you get a grant, and now they'll cost you one. This appears on Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts, my Substack. You must subscribe. It's so interesting what happened. The Trump administration doesn't like how the Columbia University handled the Middle East protests. And I want to be very clear. I'm not commenting about the Middle East protests. And all of you people in my comments, leave me alone. That's not my interest, okay? I think we have to agree that how they handle the protests, everyone will agree there are things they might have done better. Maybe preserving free speech better. Other people might think protecting Jewish students better. There are lots of things everyone thinks they could have done better, including the Trump administration. All right, that's the premise. Trump wants to punish them. He wants to punish Columbia University. So how does he do it? He cancels $400 million in federal funding and grants. But they don't cancel every NIH grant. I'm trying to estimate, I think it's about 1 in 3 NIH grants gets canceled. Who's getting canceled and who didn't get canceled? When you start to look at the people crying on Blue Sky, complaining in articles on Blue Sky on Twitter about their grants being funded, I noticed something interesting. I would pull their grants and read them on NIH Reporter, and they often had language like this. Given that a disproportionate share of those Medicaid-paid births and experienced adverse events occur in given that a disproportionate share of the events occur in, quote, low-income and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, we will also measure the impact of whatever it is on racial health equality. Black, Indigenous, people of color. That's the language that's letting these grants be flagged for deletion. I'm sure diversity, person of color, equity, these kinds of buzzwords are the reason why these grants and not other grants are canceled. And guess what? What do you expect? Here's what happened. The Biden administration prioritized, and then the DEI machine prioritized a culture where if you put all this buzzword bullshit in your grant, and let's be honest, many of these grants have nothing to do with Black or Indigenous people. That's not the purpose of the grant. They know they're not going to be making a particular sub-commentary on Native American tribes. Okay, they know they're not doing that. Okay, it has nothing to do with that. They're just putting that bullshit in so they'll get funded. And in the Biden administration, you would get funded. The more bullshit you talked about all this DEI stuff, you're going to get funded. But ironically, that's the same reason you're going to get canned for funding in Trump. This buzzword science, the way the study sections fund people, just blew up in their face. All these people who filled their application with these kind of language are the ones getting canceled. And it's the investigators who didn't buy into this are the ones who didn't get canceled. I have a colleague at Columbia University who writes, quote, lots of PIs in Columbia whose grants did not get canceled are thankful they did not include DEI buzzwords in their application. Once a buzzword, now a liability. Easy come, easy go. Here's my point. My point is this. We need a grant system that isn't so stupid. It would just give grants to people who put DEI buzzwords in and then later rescind them just because they had those buzzwords in. We need a system that actually prioritizes the merit of the grant. We do not have that system. We have study sections who have deteriorated into mediocrity. They're dominated by DEI mindset. Trump is the only check and balance on DEI in the whole system. And Trump represents the majority of Americans who really don't like this stuff. They want science to be about science. Not everything is about Indigenous persons of color, and neither is that grant. Let's be honest, it has nothing to do with that. They want science to be about science. That's what we should be funding. We shouldn't subscribe to DEI buzzwords. What's in vogue today will not be in vogue 5 years from now. We need to have a better system. I still think the only way to settle this, randomized controlled trial, 100 million, this current nonsense study section bullshit way, 100 million, just have a modified lottery, a basic threshold to get into the lottery. You're a real person with a real lab, and then we randomize the gift giving. And we'll follow these out a few years into the future, and I bet randomly giving it out will be better. And once we know randomly giving it out is better, then we can make the application 1 page long. We don't need to actually bother with all this stuff. All this bureaucracy can die, and all the money we spend on study sections and these myriad NIH officers can go away. We can actually put more money into research and less money in administration. I think the current system is so broken. Buzzword science was always a dangerous game. It was completely hijacked by the DEI machinery, and now they're paying the price. I have one more suggestion. Trump went after Columbia University because of their handling of the Middle Eastern protests. Okay. I think Trump should go after universities that punished faculty for speaking their mind on COVID-19. That's right. If a university told you not to talk about masking kids, if the university said you shouldn't be talking about against lockdowns, you shouldn't be talking that masks don't work, you shouldn't be protesting or criticizing vaccine mandates, those universities should start to be punished. They should lose grants. And why do I think this is necessary? It's necessary to teach the administrators a lesson. The only way to hit them is to hit them in the wallet. That's the only spot they feel. They feel nothing else. They're indifferent to everything else. You have to hit them in the wallet. Also, why should the public fund universities that don't allow faculty to have a range of views on policy issues? The only views that were allowed were views comporting with the Democratic Party. Why should all of us, 50% of Americans who are not Democrats, fund universities that only allow Democrat policy views? Among tenured professors who have freedom of speech, who have the right to air their own opinion, why should we have that system? I think this is the way Trump should hit them. Scott Atlas remains censured by Stanford University. Scott Atlas, the neuroradiologist who helped Trump in the first administration. What was Scott Atlas's crime? He thought you shouldn't mask toddlers, we should reopen schools, and lockdowns were barbaric. Sounds to me like Scott Atlas was a visionary, and he shouldn't have been punished. He should have actually been given a medal. But Stanford treated him poorly. And they should set up a hotline, an NIH hotline. Right now there's a hotline that says, I've been sexually harassed, I work for this PI, this work is fraudulent, I work for this PI. The new hotline should say is, my university told me to shut the fuck up about topic XYZ, and that's a violation of academic freedom. And those hotlines should be investigated by NIH, and those universities should pay the price. Cancel some of their grants. Will you cancel them based on what buzzwords are in there? I'm not sure, but anyway, you cancel some grants, even at random. We'll teach them the message that they shouldn't do this kind of stuff. Now, what about the people on these grants? I have some sympathy for the young people on these grants who've been bamboozled into this system. Some of the older people on these grants, they know the game they're playing. They're putting all this bullshit buzzwords in because they are playing a game, and I don't have much sympathy for those older people. I also think that one thing everyone in the system should be taught is you can't be so dependent on any one grant. They can always cut your grant. Any grant can be cut at any time. Don't be dependent on one stream of funding. If you are, you're extremely vulnerable. This is a lesson that we've told people in academics for a long time. So why are you surprised that that lesson is true? I mean, it's true, okay? You need diversified funding sources to run a lab. I run the VK Prasad lab. You can see www.vkprasadlab.com. We publish 570 papers or something like that. Publish like 50 papers a year. We have a big group of people doing this work. You have to have diversified funding sources, diversified labor force. It takes a lot of planning, but I would not have sunk all my eggs into the NIH basket, and I certainly wouldn't be willing to put all this bullshit buzzwords in my grants, even though ironically a lot of our work has more to do with what will benefit poor Americans regardless of their race, and we've done probably more for equity than a lot of all these other grants that just talk the talk and don't walk the walk, because we've actually studied the real problems with cost and evidence that plague the cancer field. You can read my book Malignant if you want to be further convinced at that point. So, all right, those are the things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about JAMA Internal Medicine. Yeah, JAMA, what are you doing? Okay, you're going to get. Oh, the last thing, Columbia took the L. I've heard from internal discussions that's being leaked that Columbia, they're not going to sue Trump in court like all these whining universities about indirect suing. They're actually decided that it's strategic to take the loss, admit they fucked up, put a plan for it to do better, rather than continue to engage in a war with this administration. I encourage universities to pull your head out of your ass. Stop fighting the indirect cuts. Stop taking them to court. Realize that you have lost. You've lost the public opinion. The public opinion shows you're polling worse than Congress. Nobody trusts you. Nobody trusts you because you did fucking lie about masking kids and vaccine mandates. You fucking lied about all that shit. You also shut people up. You fired people who disagreed with those policies. You really fucked up the universities, okay? You really fucked up the pandemic. You really should lose credibility for being a pawn of the system, and you should lose funding. You did all that. You're not in a good bargaining position. As they say, you're in a weak spot. You don't have any place to negotiate. So don't sue them in court because you think you can fight the federal government. Even if you win, you're indirect. They can screw you in a million ways. They control the purse strings. You need to come to the table and admit You made mistakes. Admit what those mistakes are. Bring out the faculty you've been muzzling in the back and say, actually, we do have diverse thinkers at our university. Here they are. Let me just dust him off. Look, he looks okay. We haven't been keeping him in the prison cell back there. Bring him out and have roundtable discussions. Try to understand some of the public sentiment about you and try to respond in a more constructive way. Maybe you're right, our indirects are too high. Should they go to 15? No, but how about 25%? Or how about 20%, and we will actually explain more of our indirects? These are the strategies universities need to employ, and I see Columbia is smart enough to know that. Who is it? Katrina, who's a doctor. She has some bit of pragmatism left in her. She's the president of Columbia after the other president got booted, so she might be able to fix that. Broadly speaking, universities need to get their act together. The New York Times has a little op-ed on this. It's kind of starting to acknowledge that they screwed up, but not yet to the degree that I would like. All right, those are my thoughts on this issue. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. I'm sure the YouTube algorithm is also in cahoots with the same, government agencies trying to suppress this kind of diverse ideas. So you need to send this video link to a friend of yours, a colleague of yours. That's how we get the message out. Go to www.drvinayprasad.com, drvinayprasad.com. Become a subscriber. That's a good way to overcome this. And, leave a comment below. Hit that notification bell, and I'll be back with more videos. Until next time.